Hello, everyone, and thank you for coming to this webinar session brought to you by BELTA and with the support of Heike Philp of Let's Talk Online. My name is Vicky Loris, and I'm the editorial officer of BELTA, which stands for the Belgian English Language Teachers Association. Our aim is to encourage professional development through bringing English language professionals in Belgium together to discuss the things that matter to them. We also want to connect Belgian teachers to the wider world of ELT, and that's why we offer this webinar series, where we can bring our members together with teachers from around the world to watch presentations from international speakers. So hello to all our members and those of you joining us from all over the world. I've seen many countries in the chat box so far. In this month's webinar, we are delighted to be joined by Mike Harrison. Mike is one of the most active members of the online English teaching community and has presented at conferences in the UK and Europe. Apart from teaching, he is also an IELTS examiner and is the Natekla London Communications Officer and newsletter editor. He's also well known as the moderator of the IATEFL Facebook page, a thriving community of English teaching professionals, as well as for his blog, which I'll also write in the chat box, www.mikejharrison.com. So over to Mike. Welcome, Mike, and thank you very much for being here today.
Well, thank you very much for the welcome, Vicky, and thank you very much to BELTA, James, and all of you for inviting me along to do this webinar. It's a pleasure. And thank you to everyone who's logged in from all around the world, whether it's morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are. Thank you very much for coming along. This session is called The Power of Sound. It might sound slightly pompous, but it's the intention is to talk about this particular resource and discuss how to use sound effects in the classroom, as well as looking at some of the issues around managing how to record, store, and play sound effects and to share them in certain ways. So I'm hoping it will be quite practical. There will be a number of activities which you'll be invited to have a go at, which will be sort of modelling classroom activities, as well as I'll be asking for just general opinions and things like that. Before I talk more about my teaching situation and why I became interested in this, I'd like to start with a little get to know you, about your relationship with sound. So what I'd like to do is to think about three things. Overall, what does sound mean to you? What is your favourite sound? And your least favourite sound? And if the participants could type in the chat box just whatever comes first to mind when you think about those things. I'll just wait for about a minute or two and see what you come up with. Okay, I can see a lot of different things, perhaps some ones you might typically expect, especially the least favourite ones, things like jackhammers in the street, and definitely things I've thought about as potential favourite sound effects. And as you can see from there, using sound or thinking about sound, talking about sound, it's really tied in with, well, somebody said it's, I think Malu said it's life in the chat box. Sound is life, and I think that's one of the really important things about this resource and how rich it can be. So I'm going to play two sound effects that answer the second and third questions there for me. See if you can guess what they are, whether they're my favorite or my least favorite sound effect. I will give a disclaimer. You may be alarmed by one of them. Let me know if you can hear it. Can you hear the sound effect? No sound, right. Hold on a moment. That may be how I'm managing. Bear with me a second. Is it coming through for people? Okay, so that was one of the sound effects. Second sound effect. Sorry about that. So those are two of my favorite sound effects or least favorite sound effects. Did you hear them enough to know what they are? Those are the two sound effects. And that initial activity, could be a warmer that you use in a classroom. Just start talking about sound before actually doing any more complicated tasks to do with language or tasks that you get your students to do. So why I got interested in sound? I'm an ESOL teacher. I teach English for speakers of other languages in Southeast London, and my students come from a variety of different backgrounds, but the majority of people that I teach are people like economic migrants, asylum seekers and refugees. It's not the typical, for example, a short stay. They're moving to the UK. They've moved to the UK, perhaps been there for a long time, and are looking to settle, really, basically. And I tend to try and stay away from resources which I feel can be a bit not necessarily the challenging aspect of it, but that doesn't engage them. And so looking at sound is a direct way of getting to grips with the students in the class, getting them thinking and using their imagination. Well, I started to read bits about sound and how language works. And I looked up different people who are working with sound, and not necessarily in ELT, but there's a history of sound effects in ELT. Alan Malley and Alan Duff published two books quite a few years ago now. One called Sounds Interesting and the other called Sounds Intriguing. So it's not necessarily a new thing, but these days it's a lot more accessible, especially with all the digital technology that we have. But reading about these things, I came across a couple of TED Talks by a gentleman who is very involved in sound and how it works with business. And there was this one quote in one of his talks that started like this: listening is. What is listening? Can I have some ideas from you? and think about language, think about how we understand the world. You know, it's quite a broad thing I'm asking, I know, but it's quite interesting. Okay, so I'm saying international, active, means of learning, keeping your mouth shut. Well, the quote in the TED Talk, and I'll add these links to the links box below near the end of this webinar, was listening is making meaning from sound. And this got me thinking, yeah, this is exactly what I'm trying to do using sound effects in the classroom. I think about making meaning in the language classroom through words and sentences and longer stretches of discourse, whether that's spoken or written. But if we go sort of another step back from that, we're not even thinking about words. So much meaning is embedded in sound. And we'll see a few examples, I hope, a little bit later. And so these two sound effects, what's the meaning of these two sound effects? I've got another couple of activities coming up, so I don't want to dwell too much on this and ask you to do anything. But just for me, what they mean, the kettle. For me, I have a cup of tea in the morning, a typical British thing to do. So kettle means morning. It means waking up, getting ready for the day, you know, a nice hot cup of tea. Same thing with the alarm clock. No, not the alarm clock, the alarm. It's not necessarily a nice sound, and alarm, I've got mixed up there, alarm clock and alarm. But you can actually have an alarm like that on your phone nowadays to really get you going. So that's more like the meaning of kind of shock and alertness. So yes, get started. I just see in the chat box there. So those are the meanings that are embedded in those sounds. A little bit more about this, why it's important in life. And this is the gentleman that I mentioned. His name's Julian Treasure. This is a photo that I found via Flickr, via Creative Commons. Search, the attribution is at the bottom of the slide. He talks about how sound is really integral to how we experience the world, how we experience different facets of that. So to do with meaning, but also to do with a number of different aspects. And the two TED Talks that I really recommend to have a look at are the 4 ways that sound affects us, and the other one is 5 ways to listen better. And these are 2 points that come up in those 2 TED Talks. They're quite short. They're about I think 5 minutes, 5 to 10 minutes each, if that. And the first one, the 4 ways that sound affects us. Well, I mean, when you see him talking about it, it becomes kind of obvious, but then you stop to think about it and you think, yes, it's very true. And those 4 ways are, as shown on the board, on the slide, physiologically, psychologically, cognitively, and behaviorally. So the examples earlier, if you hear an alarm, a loud, jarring alarm, there are changes in your body. You get started, you get like a shot of cortisol. So you're ready to get away or fight as necessary. Psychologically, what's the type of sound that most people listen to every day? Music. And music is something that can really affect our emotions. If you think about classical music, perhaps in particular, can be very emotional. If you listen to certain somber music, it can affect your mood. Cognitively, if I start to talk to you and I play the alarm sound effect again, is it going to be so easy to understand what I'm saying? You'd have to make much more conscious effort listening to two things at once. So this is perhaps leading away from thinking just about sound, but in the classroom, if you've got a if you've got a what's the word? If you've got a noisy classroom happening with pair work and things going on there, perhaps that's not the best place to be for good cognitive processing happening. And behaviourally, so we move away from the sounds we don't like. We may be attracted to sounds that we do like. There are also 7 filters that govern what we pay attention to when we're listening. That's to do with, as well as sound, as well as to do with the when we're speaking, when we're listening to people. So you see the filters there. There are a lot of things that in an ESOL or an EFL classroom, they're there. We have different cultures. People speak different languages. Embedded within that, people have different values, beliefs, attitude in a classroom. If you tell a class to listen now, is that going to give them a good, positive attitude towards listening? And as well as expectations and intentions. So these 7 filters and the 4 ways that sound can affect us, I find are really kind of, they create this richness to the resource. But when I'm working in the classroom practically, the biggest thing that I find most interesting about using sound effects is the fact that they are not visual, for one, and a lot of the time they're non-verbal. So immediately in this situation, students don't need to rely on words. I don't need to rely on words to convey any meaning when they're listening to the sound. In the instructions to setting up the task, I would, but it's very direct. And it reminds me of a quote that I found when I was researching another talk, more to do with drawing, but I find it is relevant for using sound as well. And it's a quote by Le Corbusier, who was an artist, French artist. And the quote is, "I prefer drawing to talking. Drawing is faster and it leaves less room for lies." Now, I don't think that holds true exactly the same way for sound, but I do think it connects a lot more directly with whatever's happening in your mind. Of course, it's very open to interpretation, and that's another richness to using sound effects in the language classroom, because you can generate a lot of discussion whether people thought the same about a sound effect as other people. So on to more practical thing. I'm going to play another sound effect. I'd like to think all of the different things that you think you could do with this sound effect. And then I'll give my suggestions. So if you'd like to add those in the chat box as well, and see if you come up with similar things or different ideas. There are no kind of incorrect answers here. Anything is possible. And that's the same way I approach using sound effects in the classroom. There's not necessarily a particular right answer I'm looking at when I use a sound effect. So as you listen to this sound effect, can you add in the chat box the what you think you would use this for? It's just a short one, about 23 seconds. Can you hear the sound effect, by the way? Okay, I'll just go back to the beginning and give you a bit more time with that. I'm also adding a link. Okay, I'm just going to glance over the... Right, okay, everyone's guessing the location. That's good. And I see different different suggestions for that. Supermarket, restaurants, bar. Okay, and I see exactly the kinds of ideas that I was thinking of when I started using sound effects in the classroom. So using it simply as kind of stimulus for seeing what vocabulary students know. Play the sound effect, they write down anything that they think of to do with the sound. And again, it's not necessarily a right or wrong answer. It was a grocery store, so you're misery if you guessed for the location. But anything that people think of, what do you have in the grocery store? A cash register, people talking, shopping list. And I find it generates a lot of those items of vocabulary that are not just single words, so not just single word lists, but those gerund nouns and gerunds, collocations, more complex nouns, cash register, and shopping list. And thinking about activities as well. With sound, a lot of the time there's activity embedded there as well. Other more involved activities, yes, use it as a basis for a quick role play, but don't necessarily set it up long-windedly. Just play the sound effect, perhaps once, just for the students to get their mind into it. You might want to tell them the location before you play, or you might want to see what they come up with first. And perhaps then play again, but give the students the task of imagining themselves in that situation, thinking about how they're feeling, what they're doing, what they're saying, who's there with them, and then using that as a basis for them just to, on the spot, create a quick dialogue or conversation. And again, it's not anything that needs to start off too big. Just say, okay, a conversation for 30 seconds. And I find it really is really generative, gets the students involved with each other and gets them using language which then can be refined, extended and worked upon afterwards. And we'll see in a moment ways of recording, and you could use those recording devices and applications to record that work and go back to it later on. So really, really rich possibilities. Okay, the next practical thing to think about with sound effects is how you're going to store those files on a computer or another device, if that's the way you're working. Of course, in years gone by, in the past, it would be on CD. Before that, on cassette tapes, things like that. But nowadays, we've got many more options and many quite, if we have the technology, quite handy and quite useful. So, just to explain that list that you see on the slide there. First of all, physically, how you're going to store the sound effects. There may be a number of different devices that you can use to record and then play back. That could be thinking back. It could be something like a cassette tape recorder, simple as that. But in the 21st century, things like your PC, most laptops nowadays have an embedded microphone, or you can get quite cheap external microphones. So one way is recording onto the PC. Okay, maybe not quite so practical with some sound effects. Maybe running water wouldn't be quite a good tool to use for recording a stream or a river. You want to drop your laptop into the water there. But we see the possibility. Perhaps more useful, things like smartphones, also MP3 players, they tend to have nowadays applications on them which allow you to turn them into recording devices. And more dedicated devices, things like digital audio recorders, which again, nowadays, they're the type of thing that you can record, and they have a USB stick, and you can stick them straight into your computer for playback, or you can play back straight from the device. When you get past that stage, so you've recorded them, and you have your device or your computer ready, how do you manage them then? Okay, well, thinking more of initial kind of initial storage devices that we have, things like memory sticks. You could store a lot of sound effects on a memory stick, 2-4 gigabytes. They're about, when you record them, they're not very big at all. Comparatively to sort of images, typical image is probably 1.2 megabytes. Sound effects can be quite short. You haven't been able to hear. I will try and keep it steady now. Okay, sorry about that. Thank you. Where was I? So you could store them on a memory stick, store them on a computer shared drive, if your institution has something like that. A bit more collaboratively nowadays with cloud computing, things like Dropbox, useful for sharing any files really. So with sound effects, it's the same thing. And I'll show how that can link with other applications as well on social media, to make it easy to share in those kind of environments. The other options that you have are uploading sound effect files, audio files, to a website. So that might be something like a wiki or a blog, or if your institution has one, something like a VLE, virtual learning environment. And typically, when you have those kind of uploaded files, they're generated as a link to the content. And so playback is done through your computer's media player. One thing that's important to think about with all of these devices and how they're stored, the audio files are stored, is the formats. Perhaps the most commonly known audio file format is MP3. But there are others. There's Windows Audio, WAV. There's also nowadays, and this is one that is typically used by Apple, and that's the MP4 audio only, which the extension is M4A. But there are a lot of other audio files that it's possible to record with those devices. So it's really something to experiment with to see about compatibility, make sure there's no issues there. If you want to get more involved with WordPress, that's the WP that you see there below. With WordPress, there's a plugin which is free if you've got a WordPress blog, a self-hosted one, called WordPress Audio Player, and that gives you a a way to upload sound effect file and then link that file to a button on a website page. The last item or things that you can see there are other apps. I'm going to open another share now. I'm just going to share my screen very briefly to show you what those two apps look like. They are web apps, but they are also mobile as well. They have mobile applications which can be used to record sound effects directly if you have something like a smartphone. And I know for certain that they are on iOS iPhones and iPads, and they're also on Google Play if you have an Android device. I'm not 100% sure about Windows phones or other mobile operating systems. So I'm going to just share my screen. Bear with me a second. Okay, I'm not going to actually know whether you can see my screen. So I will hope for a moment. I'll just move around and show you and hope, and I'll come back in a moment. So this one is AudioBoo. The link is in the box below the slides, audioboo.fm. And what this does is you can upload a sound effect file, or you can record directly using your computer. And then you get a user account area, and you have sound effects that can be played straight from that website. SoundCloud is another one, and just show you, it's more used by, I think, musicians and some podcasting type activity, but you can upload any audio file again and play it back. It pops up on the website and it can be done straight from there. As I said, these both have mobile applications that can be used. Oh, I think I may have. Oh, oh, did you see that?
Yeah, I just screenshot.
Okay. Okay, I think I've got rid of the screen share. Right, okay. Can you hear me again? Right, okay. Sorry if there was any confusion there. I had a moment where I had two windows open for Adobe Connect. To the question I can see in the chat box just then, I haven't used voices, so I can't comment on that one. But SoundCloud and Audio Boo I've started to get to using for sound effects, and I've used them in particular for more social sharing of sound effects. And I'll show an example of something that I've done there. But again, just a few more practical things to talk about, and this is how to manage the recording and then sharing of sound effects. And I'm going to try to show you just with my phone held up to the screen. So if it's not clear, I will be blogging about various things to do with sound effects. I'll give you the link to where that's going to happen at the end of the session. So on the iPhone is the one that I'm using at the moment, but there are equivalents on Android devices and other phones, as far as I know. There's usually a voice recording app, and on the iPhone it looks a bit like that. And the useful thing about that is that you can easily share audio files by email or message. So you record something, and I've recorded things like underground trains, birdsong, many different things, and then you are given a list of audio files. Again, this is M4A format, and there's a share option, and you can actually edit them straight on the phone, and then you can share them via email or via message to yourself. So that's not the most intuitive, but it's a way of recording using a phone. I'm afraid I don't know particularly about Android applications, but I do know that voice recording does exist on other phones. The other things that are useful to do with managing sound effects, and if you're working online with your students, are to use things like Dropbox. I don't know how many people are familiar with Dropbox, but it's a cloud storage application, I suppose, or service, dropbox.com, and it allows you to share files with other people from where they're stored online. So you create a file and you can download it onto your computer. There's an application that works with the cloud service. You can make a file and then share that with your students by using a link. Heike, I'm not sure I did the correct thing with sharing my screen earlier. I don't know if it actually worked as smoothly as it should do.
Do you want me to share the screen again now? I can move it to another layer.
Yeah, I'm going to go on to screen share.
That would be my layer.
On screen.
Yeah. Then we see it better.
Okay. 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 Can you see my screen now? Yes. Okay. Excellent. Thank you very much. This is showing you how the Dropbox service works. This is a file that's on my computer linked to the Dropbox service, and so I've got a file called sounds, and then you can share them with a Dropbox link. Okay, hold on a moment. Can you see my Facebook page? I don't know if I'll actually see this, see your message, so I hope that it works. If I share directly from there, that gives people a link. And that could be done similarly on a blog or wiki or any kind of website. You'll see though that below there are 2 links that I've shared from SoundCloud and from Audioboo. And from those sites, so Audioboo and SoundCloud, if you highlight and copy the link and then go to Facebook, the audio file, the sound effect is embedded and can be played directly. It comes up as a embedded widget type thing there. So if you have a Facebook group with your students, or if you're using media in that way, it can be a really useful thing to do. And I know that it works similarly on, for example, Tumblr, microblogging service. So it can be a really handy, again, thing to do with using these sound effects with your students. Okay, sorry if there's been issues about the mic again. Tricky to manage these things. So that's the social sharing aspect of using sound effects, and it's really, really nice way that these apps integrate with each other to work in that way. And if you do use social media with your students, it can be really cool. So I'm going to, this is nearly getting to the end of the slideshow. There will be some time for any questions that people have. I'd like to play one more sound effect, but I'm not going to give any clues as to what it might be. And I'm going to show you how I shared it on Facebook in particular, shared it with a group of other teachers. So I will now play the sound effect. I hope everyone can hear the sound effects. Haha, treading grapes. I don't teach any winemaking students, unfortunately. I shared this in the IATEFL Facebook group. Hold on a moment, I've just got to skip past a few things. I was just demonstrating how a mobile device can be used to upload to something like SoundCloud or Audioboo and then be shared via social media and then get reactions from people. And that's how it shows up on the Audioboo page with the file there. And you'll see that people can add comments on the Audioboo page as well as if you share it via social media. But I didn't embed it in that way. I shared a link to the Audioboo and I asked people in the IATEFL Facebook group to share with me their thoughts, and I think some of them echo those that were in the chat box. And you'll see that there were different interpretations of that, some of them echoing the walking on ice, but there were others who thought about eating crisps. So again, this really gives an opportunity for the imagination to interpret it in different ways. And I've had this happen to me in the classroom before as well, with the sound effect of rain. And one student said, "Oh, that's my shower." So I think it's really nice, this interpretation. It goes back to what we're expecting to hear, what we're intending to hear, intending to do with listening, that affects how we interpret sound. Again, running slightly out of time, so this will be a brief kind of overview without going into too much detail, but to say that I will be writing a bit more about these two applications in particular, or three that you can see there. And these are editing applications. Actually, I should say two of them are editing applications. One of them is a recording application. Audacity is a free to download audio editor. There's versions for Windows and for Mac, and no, I'm not sure if there's one for Linux or other operating system, but definitely Windows and Mac. And what it does is it allows you to import audio files and to trim them so that you can just select the bit that you want. So perhaps you recorded a long sound effect, 1 minute, 2 minutes. You don't necessarily want it, or you just want a quick 30-second part of it. So it's a really useful tool to download onto your computer. As I said, it's free to download. There's quite good community support on their website, as you can see linked in the chat box. And it's very adaptable in terms of the files that you can import. So as I mentioned before, MP4A, MP3, WAV, lots of other file extensions for audio files that can be imported and then be edited with Audacity and exported in a different format. So if you need to have something that is MP3, you can't play the other formats, you can do it using Audacity. The other one that I find is really good for this, if you're working mobile, is, and I'm afraid my mobile experience here is just limited to iOS, so it's on the iPad, and that's Hokusai. I think that's the pronunciation, Hokusai, the first word that you can see there. And it's an audio editor for the iPad. So it's basically a similar thing to Audacity. You can import files onto your iPad and you can edit them there. I'll just try by holding up to the screen my iPad to show you what it looks like, basically. Okay, so we see here, hold on. It's just like, not doing this very well. It's just like you import the file and then you can edit it using your fingers. So another sound effect. And again, that's another one that I'm experimenting with. I need to use a bit more to work out exactly the best things that you can do with it. Pocket WavePad again is a similar one, but is directly recording for the iPad again. It's not one where you can import an audio file and then work with it, but you can use it to record a sound effect or just to record. These are not exclusively for using as sound effect recording devices or applications. And then you can edit and manipulate the file that you've recorded. I've come to the end now, or just to the the end. So I'd just like to think for a moment if you think there are any issues about the use of sound effects, and thinking particularly with language students that we should definitely consider. There's one I'm thinking of in particular, but I want to see what you think of first of all when using sound effects. So if you do have any suggestions, if you could type them in the chat box. Right, certainly asking for permission. If it's you recording, the supermarket recording that I used today was one that I'd downloaded from a website, so they would have got permission beforehand, I imagine. Yeah, certainly the different audio formats is a big problem. Making sure they work with the different devices that you're using. Manipulating sounds, I'm not thinking about sort of with bad intentions. It's just yeah, editing them and sharing them rather than anything else. Thank you for the link, Joe. Okay, I'll have a look at that. Okay, the one big issue that I see, this may be particular to my teaching situation, but I think it's quite relevant, isn't anything to do with the technology or the intricacies of using mobile devices and things like that. It's actually making sure to be careful if there are any sounds which are going to be particularly upsetting for students. If you teach students like those that I do, they may have seen quite traumatic things if they are asylum seekers or refugees. So a sound effect of a gunshot, to give an example, might not be the best resource to use in the classroom. So as well as all the technical questions, issues that people have mentioned, just to be aware about this, because as I said, it's quite a strong connection to what we're thinking about and visualizing with sound. So I would say that's one big thing before anything else, before worrying about audio files and before worrying about how to manage the devices. I've come to the end, so I hope there's some practical ideas that you've got for using sound effects, and we'll have a minute or two, I think, if anybody's got more questions. But just to say thank you very much for having listened. The links that you can see there are to my personal blog, so the top one there, mikejharrison.com. The second one is a site which I'm just setting up, which is going to look at how to use sound in the language classroom, and I'm hoping to be able to offer a very kind of short course type thing at the beginning of September. So the Monday at the beginning of September, I think, is the 2nd. I'll be opening a Moodle course on this website, thesoundbooksite.com. It will be at the top, and it will be under a menu item called Courses. And please don't go there yet, it's not quite set up. Just to spend a bit more time using the facilities that the Moodle platform offers to explore using sound effects and talking about these issues that we can have that come up with sound effects. If anybody has any questions they'd like to ask, not necessarily in this webinar, my email address is there, mjah84@gmail.com. Okay, and I'd like to say again, thank you very much for listening, and I hope you managed to hear me okay despite mic problems. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mike, for being with us today. If you'd like, our attendees can ask you a few questions. Claudia asks, oh yeah? She would like to send you some of her activities with sound effects.
Okay.
You have all the info there, Claudia. There was a question during the webinar. Tammy answered, but maybe you also have some additional information. If you know, you mentioned the MP3, WAV, and MP4. Are they all universal? Do you know which ones of them are universal?
It's, if you can, I hope you can hear me okay. It's something that I need to find out more about myself, if I'm honest. Different media players, so thinking of a typical example, Windows media player on PCs. Some of the audio formats are not supported by the codecs that are underlying pieces of software which enable the media player to read those audio files. So, for example, anything that's on a PC gets on better with anything that's a Windows file format. So WAV is going to work more easily, or will be definitely something that works with Windows Media Player. MP3 works more or less universally. MP4A or M4A, which is the video audio, isn't something that is always supported, for example, by Windows Media Player. So there are those issues to bear in mind when you're using audio files. Yeah.
What would you
There are
recommend
free.
for low-tech environments?
There are some.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry, go ahead.
It's a different question. You go ahead. Finish what you wanted to say. Sorry about that.
I was just going to say that if you Google, there are some websites which enable you to convert files to different formats. So I think one, for example, if you Google media converting, something like that, you'll be able to find something where you can upload your file and change it into different formats.
Another question is, what would you recommend to low-tech learning environments, to teachers that don't have a lot of access to technology?
Right. Yeah, this is something that came up in a sound effect workshop I did before. Any mobile phone has a microphone. So if you have a look at the links box below, there's a link to using mobile phone as an audio recorder. And this was something that totally slipped my mind, but a participant in an audience in the audience for a workshop that I did said you can do that all with this normal Nokia phone. So you don't need to have these smart devices and all the technology. If you want to be just doing it immediately, you can use an ordinary mobile phone to record something and to play it back again. There are issues there with file formats. It's quite difficult to get something off of an older mobile phone and into a format which you could use in other environments like on a PC. But if you just have the device and you want to use it, that's the most accessible way.
Are there any more questions from the attendees? Have you got any more questions? It's great that you have all the links there, Mike, to your websites. Your new website looks really, really interesting. I'll definitely be exploring that one, and I'm sure a lot of people will too. Heike is asking a question. Do you like freesound.org?
It's not one that I've come across. For freely available sound effects, I've used PACDV most often, and the link again is in the box. So that's www.pacdv.com/sounds. For the ambient sound effects, it's got quite a nice selection. Not exhaustive, not massive, but good enough. Like the grocery store sound effect I played earlier on. They are free to download and to use, just as long as you're not making a direct profit from them. So it's that sort of licensing there. But I will check out Free Sounds. Thank you for the link, Heike.
Joe Dale is posting some nice links there in the chat box and some ideas as well for all of us to see there. Are there any more questions? Don't forget to follow our Facebook page, BELTA Belgium, for more information about when Mike's webinar will be uploaded to our website. The website is www.beltabelgium.com, where you can find all the webinars we've done so far. Mike's will be uploaded in the following days, and also you can find other things too there, like our blog, if you are a member. Information about upcoming workshops and events that BELTA is organizing, and also you can become a member. Why not? There are lots of benefits to becoming a member of BELTA Belgium. And also we'll also have all the links that Mike mentioned, as well as the links again to his website. You can also follow him on Twitter at HarrisonMike. Heike is writing there that you can download Mike's slides as well.
Thank you, Heike.
There are all the instructions there in the chat box for all of us to download the slides. Great, so there's the file down there, and you can download all of Mike's slides. So if there are no more questions then, I'd like to thank Mike, first of all, for being here with us today. It was a fantastic webinar, Mike. Thank you very, very much for all the information you gave us, all the tips and the ideas. Thanks to everyone who was here from lots of countries around the world. It was great to see all these countries. And for your links that you posted, your questions, your comments, your input, thank you very, very much. From all of us here at BELTA, thank you very much, and don't forget to follow our website so you can see the following webinars and events. Many thanks to you all.